welcome to everybody. I'll just introduce myself, and then I'll explain how this is all going to work. So I'm Heather Barrett-Mold. I'm a past master gardener for Which Reed Horticulture, not just gardening. I'm an environmental scientist. I'm heavily involved in Pollinating London Together, founder member of that. I've been embedded in the land-based industry for quite a long time, agriculture and horticulture. So I headed up a college where we had a 600-acre farm, and we had a fruit production unit and production of fruit juice and cider. So quite a range of things that I've been involved in over the years. So the way this is going to work is that we have 3 speakers, and each of them are going to talk for about 8 minutes. And so I'll introduce each of them before they speak. So we're going to start off with Poul Hovesen. Poul is currently Director of Farming at Holcombe Estate, and he's Chairman of Catalyst Farming, a data management company set up in 2019 to share knowledge across 4 progressive farming companies in Norfolk. I know that he is very keen making sure that farmers are able to share their good practice and to share that innovation. And I know he's very keen on making sure that farmers get that level of education and can improve yields whilst reducing environmental impact. So ideal for us to have Poul today. He's Honorary Fellow of the National Institute for Agricultural Botany, a liveryman of the Worshipful Company of Farmers, and will be Vice President of the Royal Norfolk Show in 2024 and President in 2025.
Thank you, Heather, for your kind introduction. As you'll have heard, I've got a long experience in practical farming. I started my career in the late 70s, a time when there was a huge increase in output due to the introduction of chemicals and fertilizer strategies. Over the last 2 decades, we have seen too many issues relating to too intensive production systems with devastating effect to our landscape, habitats, water, and the food production as a whole. It only took us less than 30 years to do so much damage, and we continued. We have had agricultural policies via the RPA that supported overgrazing, resulting in diffuse pollution, overproduction of combinable crops in areas that changed our landscape with damaging impact on our habitats, intensive vegetable production on fragile soils such as the fens and the brecks, 2 areas that used to have huge landscape value and carbon storage. We must work with ecologists to be more intelligent in managing our landscape. We must get more creative policies and not relying on policies that are too generic, not suitable across the entire country, but creating habitats in its natural place in the landscape. In the same way, we should produce food in areas that has soil type and climate that'll help us to secure our food production. We must make sure we get science and research to help us creating more sustainable farming systems. Our breeders must breed varieties that are more resistant to disease so we can reduce our pesticide usage. We must use latest research and technology to create more sustainable production systems that protect the landscape and prevent polluting our water. We must get our food research to influence what we produce more healthy food. Why do we still grow crops that need high levels of nitrogen applications to produce the bread that are not healthy for us to eat? I'm fortunate to live in Norfolk. We have several of the leading science and research centers around us. School of Environmental Science at UEA, John Innes Institute, world leader in plant breeding, the Quadram Center for Food and Health, NIAP for Applied Research, just to mention a few. Why are we not making more use of all that in our food production systems? We should only use safest and best technology in our production systems. We need to get our supermarkets to be part of this, only accepting food produced in a sustainable way. They need to help in educating the public of the benefit of buying healthy food. I recently, like some of you, the city food lecturer, and Her Royal Highness Princess Anne Barrett-Mold finished off the evening very eloquently and said, "I have missed one word all evening: education." We must educate using evidence-based science and research. How do we attract a new generation of farmers? We need to change the reputation of farming. We must change the way farming is looked at by the public and highlight what an interesting career there can be in the industry. And more important than anything else, we must join it up. There do not need to be a conflict. We can produce good and healthy food. We can look after the countryside and its habitat. We can protect our water and we can feed our people with healthy food. But we need to join up, we need to work together, and we need to educate in all aspects.
Thank you, Paul. That's really good. Thank you very much. So our next speaker is going to be Sarah Calcutt. Sarah's CEO of City Harvest, but what you might not also know is that Sarah is a fifth-generation fruit farmer, previously grown and marketed fruit. She's a liveryman of the Worshipful Company of Fruiterers, non-exec director of the Covent Garden Market Authority, a founding non-exec director of Outfield Technologies, and serves as a commissioner on the new government commission into the future of food banks. So Sarah started volunteering for City Harvest and now finds herself CEO of City Harvest. And well, I'm sure she's going to be able to tell us a lot more about City Harvest, but she has moved it so far and contributed heavily to the success that it is today. So thanks, Sarah.
Heather, you're very kind. I'm very fortunate to have inherited an exceptionally well set up and rather fabulous organisation. I'm not sure I can really take very much credit at all. I have got a short presentation to run. Someone's going to have to send me a quick note and a kick if I go over, because I'm fairly notorious for just talking too much, actually. City Harvest, we're 10 years old this year. We were founded essentially on really good environmental practice principles. You know, good food going to waste, any food going to waste, creates an enormous environmental disaster. The big challenge for us in our sector, you're looking at of all the food produced in the world, 1/3 of it goes to waste. If it was a nation, it would be the third largest contributor to greenhouse gases. So over the last decade, City Harvest has rescued £110 million worth of food at retail value, and 90% of that is surplus that's come from farms. With my background, with the specifications that we meet for retail partners, and then it's close dated once it's gone into the retail chain. So it's all, you know, any category you can think of. It is a product that has failed to find its retail sale. There isn't a commercial outlet for it, or under the court-hold agreement, we can then extend its date. This is the bit that we go in. We don't trade any food. We don't charge for any food that we share, and we also don't pay. We don't pay for any food. Free food is the real sort of bedrock of City Harvest, because if you run a community organisation, your funding is terribly small, and by us providing this free food, it frees up that £110 million worth of value into street level intervention and real change, and it helps pay for legal support and training for work and childcare and just everything that will help affect change. We have delivered 61.5 million meals worth of food in that decade. And everybody that donates food to us receives a Cat 3 emissions compliant B Corp supporting environmental report. We calculate across 13 categories, and we calculate from the point the seed goes in the ground, if you like, to the point where it would have gone into landfill. And so this is the volume of greenhouse gases that we've averted over the decade. The scale of the problem that we're addressing is huge. If you look at nationally, you're looking at 20% of households with children have food insecurity. So that's just not enough food on the table from Monday through to Sunday. It's children going to school without breakfast and nothing in a lunchbox. It's parents not having food in order to give their children something. In London, it's 25% of households, and if you're a single parent family, then that is rising very rapidly up to the point where it's in the sort of the upper 50% of London families have got a huge challenge finding enough food. For the nutritionalists amongst you, this of course then has an instant impact on the health of people within the household, their ability to weather change and challenge. And this hospitalisation figure due to malnutrition, this is outside of the obesity figure. 1.3 million people in the UK today suffer from an illness or a disease that is directly relatable to poor nutrition in their lives. So this free food that we share, we have 375 plus charities. So we look at this in terms of in a normal month, if it doesn't have a school holiday, it's around the 350, 360. But during the holidays, we do a lot around holiday hunger. We're spread across 30 boroughs in London. I need to revise that figure because by Friday this week, it'll be 120,000 a week that we're feeding. But we do have this huge, great waiting list, and that's 76,000 people on that waiting list of those that are in an approved organisation that we look after. We know that we could reach them if we have the volume of food to feed them. And the last line on the slide is essentially to do 1 meal a day for all those in need. That's 60 million meals a month that organisations like ourselves need to be sharing. We're sharing currently just over 1.2 million meals per month with people. So who we support, just a quick whistle-stop tour through all the organisations we look after. Essentially, it's grassroots community groups. We have around 150 who cook for others. And so they're engaging, it's within sort of four distinct groups. So we look after those that cook for others. So soup kitchens and community centres. We look after food banks, social supermarkets, and a growing group now of social cooperatives. So those that have been hopefully people who've progressed through the support networks available, and they have some budget a week, which they then pool with all of their neighbours, and they can buy it, at a reduced wholesale rate. And we then will top that up with fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, short-dated deli, protein, and just help their budgets go that little bit further to make more of a nutritional impact. The SDGs, we are really honoured actually to be chosen by the Lord Mayor to deliver one of his coffee colloquies. So on the 16th of October, we will be doing our best to bring a panel together. We have some rather stellar people coming to join us to address SDG number 2, so looking at that zero hunger. And really the raison d'etre of City Harvest is actually condensed within these 7 SDGs that, 9 SDGs that we work with. Every day we're looking at sustainable communities. We're looking at responsible consumption. We also do campaign to help people manage waste in their households and be more thrifty with their food. We work across all of these. One of the things I find great joy in City Harvest, that it has this amazing dual purpose. We are an environmental charity that has this amazing beneficial social consequence. Where did its food come from? To be honest, it's everybody, and it's from across the UK. There are some elements of surplus food that we can't save, so plate scrapings within hospitality, food that's been out on a buffet because of temperature controls. But we take in surplus from organisations who they've cooked up a substantial service dinner for people, and some portions haven't gone out, so they'll box it and label it, and then we'll go and share a beautiful meal with people, through to spare pastry from Charlie Bigham's pie making. And we also run warehouses in the 2 big wholesale fruit and veg markets of London, and anything that isn't suitable for sale but is still conceivable, we gather from there. We do a lot with farmers. We do an enormous amount with farmers. We have 2 small lorries, one of which funded by the livery companies, which visit farms 5 days a week. And it's gathering up that bin of really ugly looking pears that are the wrong shape and they can't go for processing, or it's gathering up today 6 bins of radish which are surplus to order, which had no retail sale. And it's just no good food should go to waste. So we're engaging in some research into how we can do better within London. We have done some research that indicates we need to head outwards, and perhaps Kent might be our next target, but we're very gently exploring that opportunity. I'm growing my team this year. The board has allowed me budget to invest in more team for our food and for growth within the fleet. We've also put on board a network called Excess, which is organisations like ourselves spread throughout the UK. As a combined group, we're about 80% of the size of FareShare, so have really substantial impact. And they're organisations that work like ourselves, recovering surplus and sharing to those in need for free, to make sure that you're maximising the potential social return on that investment. You just heard about the Commission into the Future of Food Banks. This is a document that's supported by Harper Adams University, funded by Rabobank, and will be feeding directly into policy development in this area, as to recognising the impact of food banks and groups in that sort of category, and ensuring that they're supported in the future, because at the moment we're all philanthropically funded rather than government funded, of course. And we're doing a lot of work around developing kitchens and those for others, so that again we're not wasting any large volume of ingredients. It's been, I have to say thank you for everybody that belongs to a livery company, because an enormous amount of what we do and an enormous proportion of the support we help actually comes via the livery movement. Livery Kitchen Initiative turned to the Livery Food Initiative. And it's like having this amazing sort of group of godparents who are looking out for your best interests and helping you find the people you need. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was really, really interesting. Okay, so moving on. Jane, Dr. Jane Anderson, CBE, consultant physician and researcher, studied human nutrition and got a PhD in that. And then that wasn't good enough. So she then went on and retrained as a doctor. Jane was Master of the Worshipful Company of Apothecaries, and she successfully introduced plant-led menus to society functions. She's also, I'm very pleased to say, a liveryman of the Worshipful Company of Gardeners, and an advocate for a One Health concept, recognising the health of people, animals and plants is inextricably linked, connected to the health of our shared environment. Jane is also chair of Charity Paintings in Hospitals and of the National AIDS Trust. So Jane, over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Heather, for that introduction. What I want to start off by saying is, yes, I'm a doctor, and yes, I studied nutrition a long time ago, but I'm not a specialist. I'm coming at this as somebody with a general health interest and background, and seeing increasingly that food, planetary health, animal health, all linked up together, are compromising what we do. I was also lucky enough to be brought up on a market garden where everything was grown, and we sold food. In those days, everything was fresh and ready to eat, and everything has changed so much. So I'm just going to very quickly talk a little bit about where I see the health background sitting, the human health background sitting, and then I'll tell you a little bit about what we did when I was Master Apothecary about trying to get plant-forward, plant-led menus into the zeitgeist, into the normal way of eating. So there's been a huge change, I think, in our understanding of food and nutrition, and a lot more interest. I mean, Tim Spector, and at this point want to acknowledge Michael Mosley, because actually going back to Paul's point about education, I think Michael did more to educate us about healthy eating and healthy diets than many, many other people. So I think I'd just like to mention with great sadness his passing. But what we do know, and this relates to something that Sarah said, going back to the Lancet Commission on diet and food, unhealthy diets pose a greater risk to morbidity and mortality than does unsafe sex, alcohol, tobacco, and drug use combined. And that's quite a big deal when you start to think about how we put food and health together. But at the same time, we also know that food systems, by which I mean the whole interaction between all the bits of the food production cycle and food consumption cycle, have this huge potential to nurture human health and to support, as Paul has said, environmental sustainability. But right now, the food systems we've got in the world are threatening both those things. The interrelationship, I think, is incredibly important and is something that we tend to think in silos. But the One Health approach, which is really now coming up for 10, 15 years in the making, which brings together the World Health Organization, the Food and Agriculture Organization, international system bodies, really explore the fact that the health of people, animals, and the ecosystem are all linked up. And in the face of the pandemic, the face of antibiotic resistance, as we think about how antibiotics are used in the food chain and what that means for our health, what that means for animal health, and all that put together, what that means for the ecosystem's health, is really crucial for what we're thinking about at the moment. So the question I want to pose, and I'm not sure it's a very easy one to answer, is what is healthy eating in 2024? And Sarah, you've shown us very powerfully that either we're dealing with people who've not got enough, or we've got people who've got too much, or we have not the right proportions of what we should all be eating. And I think the dietary science has moved on hugely in the last decade, and it's increasingly clear that plant-based and plant-led menus, plant-led eating is the way to ensure optimum health for human beings in general and for the planet if done in the right way. But that's also, I think, quite complicated. And we need to think as well, going back to cost, how people can afford to eat and what it is they are able to buy, and whether they can afford to buy food that is perhaps better for them in general for their health, when actually budgets are very tight, and often highly processed food sometimes is cheaper and more available. So what is healthy eating and for whom? And I think one of the things that has really changed in our understanding has been the idea of the microbiome, and that we are not just feeding ourselves when we eat, but we're feeding this great army of microbes that are living with us. And it is increasingly clear that the biodiversity of our own interrelationships with our microbes, coupled with the biodiversity of the ecosystem, are coming together in what we need to eat to be in the best possible health as individuals, as communities, as societies, and as an ecosystem. And the microbiome, really, again, I think Tim Spector, I'm sure many of you have seen him and his books and his television programs. The gut is now, it's absolutely clear, contains thousands, millions of microbes. In fact, the numbers of cells in your gut that are of non-human origin, that are of microbe origin, is much greater than the number of cells you've got in your own body. And they're not there as passive passengers. They're there as active, they're active in health, and they're mediating between the food we eat and our metabolism. And we don't really, I think it's a very young science still, the knowledge is increasing all the time, but it's quite clear that what we need to eat to keep ourselves healthy is what we need to eat to keep our microbe passengers healthy. And I sort of think of them a bit like a football team. If they're in good shape, they're going to do really well and serve us well. And if they're not in good shape, then we're all going to suffer. But it is the metabolic pathways of those microbes that are going to make a difference to how we feel, to how we metabolize our food, to our weight, our mental health, to all sorts of things about how we are. And our microbes, we know, need fiber, and plant-based fiber, and this is where the 30 plants a week piece comes in, will ensure that the microbes have got the best chance, not necessarily perfect, but it gives them a jolly good chance to get going and to do well. And you'll have heard, I'm sure, about prebiotics and probiotics. Should we be eating those, and what's that doing to our microbiome? Prebiotics are a bit like fertilizer. It's the fiber that the bacteria and the microbes that live with us need to thrive. Probiotics are actually foods that contain microbes that can top up our own microbes. So there's a difference there. So we know these theories. We know that we've got a problem, but what are we going to do to make a difference? And I think that's a really crucial question. And Paul, you've posed it, and Sarah, you've shown us some solutions in some ways. But one thing I just wanted to tell you a little bit about was trying to engineer some change in diet and eating habits when I was master of the Worshipful Society of Apothecaries, because it seems to me that you shouldn't come to a dinner at the Worshipful Society of Apothecaries and leave in worse health than you walked in. And this meant that I thought about all these concepts we have now about thinking about more plants, fewer animal products, things that are going to help our microbiome. And so we set about a plant-led menu, plant-forward, not plant-based, but basically the plan of campaign was what is seasonal and what are the most delicious plants that are seasonal at the moment, and what could a fabulous chef do to make them into the most delicious meal that you would really enjoy eating. And then to think what it is that you would put with them. So rather than saying we're going to have spring chicken with new potatoes and whatever, you would start with saying there's going to be a delicious souffle of broad beans done in the most delicious way with new potatoes, and then maybe some chicken or some salmon or something that goes with them, small amounts, local, ideally seasonal and sustainably farmed protein piece that goes with that. And adding in those prebiotics, probiotics, the microbiome is very keen on colored food, making sure that we were using ingredients that were going to actually support the microbes as well as ourselves. Now, it worked. Party ingredients, our caterers were incredibly supportive, really helped me think about this. And we managed, I think, to get the concept. We also had menu cards on the table of every meal so that people could see and read about what it was we were trying to do, where the food had come from, and why we'd chosen the food that we had. I did a survey. It went down quite well. I had one person who said, "Madam, if you're going to serve woke green cardboard at Apothecaries Hall, I'm not coming back." But in fact, he hadn't been to the hall for 15 years and we haven't seen him since. But he was the only person who actually wrote in that language. So overall, it was a success. And I think it's really important because if we think about the city and the livery movement, food is right at the heart of it. And we are eating huge meals, and we can eat better, and we can educate ourselves, and we can educate each other by eating differently here in the City of London. So that was a success. However, of course, you only ever get a year as a master, and other masters coming after me have modified it, and Peter Gladwin has retired, and I don't know if we'll be able to get the thrust to take this forward, but we did it for a year, and I'm able to have some data that I can share that showed that it was successful. Well, successful in that people liked it and ate it and were interested. Whether it changed their health, it's a different matter. So I'm going to stop at that point, but just to say that, Sarah, like you, we've got one of the coffee colloquies coming up, looking particularly at SDG 3, which is health, and ours is on October the 23rd, and there'll be more information about that coming soon. So Heather, I'm going to stop at that point.
Thank you so much. And so just this past week, I heard a debate on Radio 4. And it was about meals for especially situations like universities and places with accommodation where you have less choice about what you're going to eat. And the debate was around actually having the plant material, the plant meals there, and they should be what is given to you as a primary option, and so that it's always led in that direction. And there might be other aspects of the choice and your diet, but actually that's the primary option, and that way you get, I think, more delicious options coming forward because people put more effort into it. So it is interesting the way the whole thing is shifting, isn't it? So we have got some questions, quite a few questions. The first one to Paul: if you could wave a magic wand or wands, what would you seek from policymakers in the next 1 to 3 years to help create a robust and resilient food system in the UK, considering fairness, equity to farmers, producers, rural economies, how to engage consumers where there's a cost of living crisis and national food insecurity, and recognise post-COVID that our system is brittle and insecure, to encourage consumers to make better food choices, to support climate mitigation and environmental considerations, and to tackle the epidemic of health issues. Well, that's an easy one, isn't it?
So I'm very fortunate that Jane obviously has spoken since the person probably asked that question, because I can absolutely support everything Jane just described. If I could move most of that speech into the production of our food and the arable crops and vegetable production, because Jane very eloquently described about microbes. We have got fungi, and I was very pleased. I was around a big garden, and we discussed this in Kew Gardens of all places. But actually, what Jane has described is what I think about moving together and try to educate together. All the principles in the guts and the diet is exactly the same principles we've got in our food production. So if we got a more seasonable vegetable, we will have a more variation in our crop production. If we looked after our soil better, we do not need to talk about other regen farming, organic farming, but we should produce food that has got a healthy impact on our diet and our guts. And hence I look to research. So if it was to shorten that answer, I think we do need science research. We need all the academics to support us, how and what kind of food we should produce. And then we need it to be educated. And first of all, we need the policy makers to have evidence over emotions. We've got too many emotions in the production system of food, and it get blinded by big statements that has got often commercial influence before it reads to it. So if I may just shorten it back to it, we have got some issues that we are adding product that has got a negative in food production. So we're adding fertilizers and pesticides that might have a negative impact on our fungi, fertilizers with salts in, pesticides that breaks down resistance and resilience. And when I said there was no conflict and shouldn't be a conflict, that if we produce our food sustainable, it'll also be healthier for the diet and the people who eat it. But we must make sure that policymakers understand where we should produce and how we produce, invest in technology and not blanket subsidies to the farming industry who downgrade the farming systems, and also that we can maintain our habitats and our landscape. And when I say there is no conflict, to go back to the main question in it, what do I wish for? I wish for a network of data-influenced decision-making that can influence politicians to create policies that will either give support to the science and the applied research or the technologies. We have more than ever got new technologies who can help us in the practical farming to try and develop it to a whole different level. And that, again, can support Sarah, because we do not need to have the amount of food waste we've got, because we can be more precise, and we can also have a much better infrastructure in the supply chain, which is also lacking a lot. And then we have got all this food that doesn't even see Sarah, who is left in the fields to rotten, and that again, the supply chain. So I'm not sure if I've been claimed, but I do think if we got evidence over emotion, if we got science research, we have had big agendas coming out, and I've challenged some of our researchers. Where were you when we had to change from the more traditional farming systems to the regen? Because in between, there's a really sustainable model where we can grow very healthy foods and we can educate it. And to that extent, Sarah, we might speak to you. We are just planning to build a big food hall at the showground and around Norwich. And we want to get all the research institute and the big producers of vegetables and other agricultural products to try and educate the public. It's big enough that the showground can be used for the rest of the year, and we can take school groups and we can give evidence base to all of it. It's quite a big project, but we hope it'll succeed.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Paul. And I think that's so important about the soil, isn't it? That, I mean, people think the soil goes on forever, and you can do anything to it and it will recover. But it is so important to maintain that top 20 centimeters, which is just what everything is growing in and surviving in. And it's so important to make sure that the biome for that is in good condition, as well as within our bodies. And it's like in your introduction, Jane, isn't it? Right at the beginning, the whole thing is so inextricably interlinked, and we need to be respectful of all of that. So there are a few questions here, quite a lot for you, Paul. I was just wondering if anybody has a question for one of our other speakers, and then I'll come back to Paul in a minute.
There was a second one from Sarah for me with magic wands.
Oh, okay. Go on then.
Well, the systemic changes I'd like to see in the UK food system to facilitate the amount of food that's wasted within the system. Yeah, reduction in the waste in the system. Now, one of the real challenges I've got that my green soul or my farming soul says we shouldn't have waste and we should have efficiency. And I've been involved in lots of agri-tech businesses over the years around reducing waste and understanding what we're doing and doing it better. The real challenge is that the biggest existential risk to City Harvest is that the technology is reducing the amount of waste that is available. Everyone's getting more efficient, and the margin on food is so tiny at the moment that you're a very foolish business indeed if you're not reducing your waste. But of course, that means that there's less for me to use for my team to go and feed people with. And the hunger issue is not going away. Every week we have new people wanting food, and they don't have any money. There's a big chunk of the population that we can educate to eat better. We can educate them around managing their food better, around wasting less, about using leftovers, all those things. But there is still this 20 to 25% chunk that just don't have food. And so my magic wand would be that we do need the mandatory reporting of wastage in the food system, that we do need to have a universally accepted benefit to handing over your surplus, that it's not a punitive recording system. So I have, when running a grower group, hidden my wastage from my members, because it does you no favors when you're standing in front of your retail partner. And so you say, yes, I have hit your targets. I have less waste this year than we did last year. What you actually should do is be congratulated for ensuring the quality of the product and the longevity of its, particularly in produce, how robust it will be to deal with the logistics chain and guaranteeing all 5 or 7 days in someone's fridge or kitchen counter. And then making that decision that this bit needs to be donated altruistically and it will go to feed somebody less fortunate. They're not a threat to the commercial marketplace. That 20% of the population are not a customer. There just is not money for them. There is no, and also in some areas, of course, we don't have access to produce either, because the margin's not enough to pay for rent and business charges, business rates. So my magic wand would be a non-punitive waste recording system that means that everyone has a positive release system within their businesses that say, this is my nominated charity partner. I can demonstrate to you their environmental benefit and their social benefit. And then we just close this circle so that no good food goes to waste. Nobody feels bad about generating waste. Nobody's penalised from producing waste. And also, if I can be super cheeky, those that actually fund this sector, those amazing altruistic individuals, like a livery company, it should have some kind of tax benefit. There used to be a corporation tax benefit for altruistic philanthropic activities with your balance sheet surplus, and that disappeared. And overnight you saw donations to charities change completely. And the government relies on this sector to deliver hundreds of millions of pounds worth of social care, frankly. And so we need to see a food benefit in this and a financial benefit. There's my magic wands, nothing too difficult to do.
Thank you. So there's a question here for Jane. So I'll do that one first and then come back to Alison's for Paul. So following the documentary Food Inc. 2, which I watched yesterday, and noted that Food Buy, who are lead procurers for food for the NHS in UK, is very plant-based menu forward thinking and has just released a new book of menu guidance. Can send you a copy.
Right.
What would you like to see to improve the nutrition and health of our children and the education piece necessary for parents and carers?
Well, huge question there. There's a lot tied up in all this. So I think one thing to know is that the food budget in the NHS, the amount of money per patient per day is tiny. I can't even remember what it is now, but anybody would struggle to try and produce something on the budget that the NHS allocates for food. And so it's great that there are plant-based or plant-forward initiatives. I think what we have to do, we've been talking a lot about education, but it goes beyond education, because the thing about food and meals, and particularly if you're not very well, is that they are incredibly socially, culturally dependent bits of our lives. What we eat, what we like to eat, the food we want to eat, particularly if we're not well, is all tied up with our emotions and our past lives. And you can educate people till you're blue in the face, but actually we've got to change the whole expectation and the whole way that we move. So, we've done it with smoking. It's no longer socially acceptable to smoke. It's becoming socially unacceptable to drive your car. We need to get it to the point where it's socially unacceptable to be eating great big slabs of meat that have been flown in from goodness knows where, in a way that actually makes people actively want to do a more healthy option, and that it becomes the norm. And I think that's the real challenge. So education alone isn't going to do it. We've got to have role models. We've got to have people who are influencers, horrible word, but who can actually help make that happen. Obviously, in hospital, a bit like the apothecaries, you should be eating well. And the hospital I work at, for example, we have a red line all the way around, no smoking on hospital premises. It ought to be no unhealthy food served in NHS settings, because that's the health benefit. So I think we've got to go further and faster. I've got a book here. Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall has just brought out a new book, How to Eat 30 Plants a Week. And so having that as these things as mainstream, really day to day, where people start saying, oh, how many plants have you eaten, as a norm, as opposed to how many bags of crisps you had. That's how we're going to change things. We've got to have the facts. We've got to have the research. We've got to have the data, but people have got to want to change the way they live, and that's much, much harder.
Good. Actually, hearing Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall talking about that book when it first came out, I mean, actually, it's very easy, isn't it, to pick up 30 different plants, and he was representing it, and you could really see, actually, yeah, I think I could do this. So yeah. It's that thing about Michael Mosley that you talked about earlier, that sort of positive approach, that support which helps people into making those choices and understanding why it is just so important. A question here from Alison for Paul. What are the incentives for farmers to farm? Well, I've assumed this is more for Paul. What are the incentives farmers to farm more environmentally? Tesco and NatWest are financing their supply chain of farmers. What do they need to do?
I think that any initiative is necessary. Soil health, you mentioned, is absolutely fundamental for us, and we need to understand how we improve our soil health, and that's where we need people to support it. We have got many initiatives from multinationals, and there is good initiatives. We've got a potato business, and we need to grow. It's a very big part of the food chain, and it's very difficult in what is called regen farming, but we are working very close with the main retailers and to try and make it as sustainable as we can. Be reassured we can grow them better in more healthier soil. So what initiatives do we need to do? I think, we need to change the way we look at food. We need to change and support Jane in that we need to make sure that we do not have production systems that has got a negative impact or can't easily be restored again, that might also compare to the health and the guts and microbes. So we do need to have government support. We need to bring more technologies in our production systems. We need to bring a lot more science and support, and we should not give it just because you own land. And that is probably...
Well, that was okay. It was good.
Pardon?
So I think it's somebody who's just not on mute.
Yeah. So I think the way we shouldn't be supported just because we own land. We should be supported to be custodians of the landscape, and we need to be supported to produce healthy food, and we maybe should be supported with technology that can help us to do that. And that is changing the whole approach to a positive. And I think we must not either push food production abroad to third world countries where it'll have a far bigger negative impact than we've got here. So hence, but we can do it. I've no doubt we can do it. There is great initiatives. We've got some big vegetable companies who are making great progress in their production systems at the moment. And livestock often gets a bad name as well, I must say. We are custodians of a national nature reserve, and we do need livestock to graze it, to keep it in a good state for it. And we can produce meat, as long as we don't eat too much of it, then we can still also have that balance right. So I think that little comment I'd like to just come in, that we do not need all to turn into vegetarian, but we maybe should eat less of it. And then we can also support that.
Yeah, and value it better.
Yes.
Offer it better if that's what's going to happen. Okay. Thank you. Well, thank you all so much. And thank you all, those people that have put forward questions. I just want to give our speakers just is there one last thing any of you want to say?
Gosh.
I don't feel obliged. Just an opportunity in case you wanted to.
I guess I'll chip in here. I think this is about joining everything up. We're living in too many silos and there are too many barriers to things being joined up. And actually, one of the great things about the livery companies is there are 111 skill sets that cover so many different areas that actually, if we put our heads together, we've got skills that we can do all together between us. So I think the livery has got a real opportunity to do something very important about food, health, sustainability, and the planet.
Excellent.
I just added a comment into the chat piece. For a very long time, all of this has sat in the far too difficult and too expensive to deal with bucket within all different departments. It's so hard. I mean, Paul, I am so with you. I mean, having waited till I have mostly grey hair to inherit what's left of my family farm, much to my mother's horror, if we are now into a regenerative system where we have intensively farmed for the last 120 years, now we are returning to a far more sustainable and environmentally gentle system. And farming will survive that way. All of my peers, everybody I trained with, they are changing their systems massively. But it's part of a movement which is misunderstood by government and being misinterpreted. And unfortunately, most of the challenges that I see in my current day job are the ones that we also see. I mean, the piece of work is needed is environment and housing and justice and education and treasury and health. They all need to get together. I mean, the challenge, Henry Dimbleby did a fantastic piece of work around food policy.
Yeah.
It spoke very much to everything that Paul has said, everything that Jane has said. And it still sits in that far too difficult and far too expensive to deal with bucket. And that's a real part of the challenge. I've been doing a fair bit of reading recently. I am a huge fan of Tim Lang, and you go back and have a look at the work that was done with the Matthew Breverton report around how we had a national diet and what happened around Dig for Britain, all these sorts of schemes. And what it actually did was structure so many systems and so many really embedded pieces of policy and our constitution that made an enormous difference. And it's just that recent practices have started unpicking some of that. And that's the mess we're in at the moment, because it's that working in silos. Each department almost competes against each other. They won't talk to each other. And absolutely, yes, please, as the livery movement, all the extraordinary people that I meet within livery companies, please let's all join together. There is a wonderful event on the 1st of July at Drapers Hall, which is a Livery Food Initiative event. Please come and join in with us, because we'll be discussing exactly this need for everybody to work together to affect real change, because massive change is needed.
And so hopefully this is...
Sarah, may I just add a little bit to that one, because two comments, very short. Sarah, and bringing that to Jane, the cost of unlocking those silos will be minute compared to the cost of the national health after the issues. So we are completely looking at it. And when we said, what do you wish from policy? Start from the other end, Sarah, what you said, unlock those silos, and then through that we will save so much money and we could have the best food production in the world.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Well, I must do some thank yous now then. Firstly, I'd like to thank Alison Gellman, who is our inspiration and leader for Livery Climate Action Group. The Livery Climate Action Group is where this seminar has come from. I want to thank Edwina, who did all the work on putting this together and who is now in New York. So I hope I hope she's enjoyed the outcome of the work. I'd like to thank Stuart, who has done all the technical background and looking after us all. And of course, thank our speakers. You have been so inspirational. It's been really excellent to listen to all three of you. And let's hope we can take this forward and do more work in this vein and break those silos down and really make use of delivery companies, because as you say, you've got those skill sets, but you've got such a wide network, haven't you, of people there who can really make a difference if we raise this to them. And of course, thanking all of you who have joined in to listen to this. So thanks very much. And hopefully this is the start of something. Thank you.